than answers about an explosive Justice Department probe under Donald Trump. Under his administration, the DOJ seized the metadata of dozens of accounts tied to House Democrats on the Intelligence Committee, including lawmakers, staffers, and family members. Chairman Adam Schiff was one Democrat caught up in the investigation into Russia probe leaks. Congressman Eric Swalwell was another. But Rod Rosenstein and other top DOJ leaders under Trump are telling people close to them they didn't know about Swalwell and Schiff being involved, according to a person I spoke with this evening. So that raises more questions. The Justice Department Inspector General has launched a probe into the matter. Meantime, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is calling on former Trump attorneys General Jeff Sessions and Bill Barr to testify. We're joined now by another member of the House Intelligence Committee, member Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Pamela.
So we're still piecing together what happened here, Congressman. There is still clearly a lot to learn. But as we look at the facts, we look at these statements coming out, I want to just ask you first off, is it possible DOJ gave Apple a bunch of numbers, no name, so they didn't exactly know they were getting Swalwell and Schiff's info at the time when they initially went to Apple in 2018?
I don't know. But what I do know is that the people that ended up getting targeted were Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee, as well as staff of the House Intelligence Committee, as well as family members of staff and members potentially, and personal office staff. It wasn't some random group of people from Congress. It was targeted at a very specific collection of people, namely Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee and their staff and family members.
If this is a case where DOJ was doing a leak investigation involving, say, a staffer on the committee, and as part of that investigation, they were able to get all of this other information involving, for example, Swalwell and Schiff. What do you think about that? Does that raise questions about leak investigations in general and the power that DOJ has to get to overreach, essentially?
Yes, it's shocking and outrageous to me. This seems like these secret subpoenas sound like things that would happen in Putin's Russia or Xi Jinping's China, not in the U.S. There's absolutely no predicate or evidence for why these investigations should have gone forward. The grand jury basically rubber stamp whatever the DOJ prosecutors put in front of them. And I think the Justice Department has just too much discretion in this type of situation that we should trust them anymore to use it properly. I think that the days when we thought that people of honor would be running the Justice Department or be the President of the United States are gone. The last 5 years have taught us that we can't allow this type of thing to happen again.
I know since the revelations first came out in the New York Times, you, other members on your committee, have been trying to get information from Apple and from DOJ. What more can you tell us about what you have learned?
My staff is trying to track it down. I got to tell you that it's just a little bit disappointing, quite frankly, that the first that we heard about this was from Apple and not Merrick Garland's Justice Department. I have high admiration for Attorney General Garland, but he and his staff should have been the ones that should have informed us. And now it's time for them to clean house, quite frankly.
Do you think that they actually knew that there were this investigation that had information about Swalwell and Schiff? Because as you know, Bill Barr, Jeff Sessions, Rod Rosenstein, former top DOJ officials under Trump are coming out and saying, we didn't have any knowledge about Swalwell and Schiff being involved. That doesn't give them an excuse. DOJ should know the information that they're getting, particularly from members of Congress and anyone having to do with Congress. But is that an option for you to think about, that maybe the Biden DOJ didn't know?
Well, first of all, with regard to Sessions and Barr, I'd like to see them come to Congress and testify under oath that they had no idea what was going on. I think that they're line prosecutors in the National Security Division from Mr. Benvenuto on down. By the way, Mr. Benvenuto was a gangland prosecutor who was brought to investigate members of the House Intelligence Committee on the Democratic side. They need to come before Congress and testify as to what happened. I think that really people need to be held accountable, and guardrails need to be put in place to prevent this from happening again. As to whether Mr. Garland and his Justice Department knew about these investigations, well, gosh, I think that they need to get to the bottom of what's going on in their own Justice Department, because if they don't know about what's going on in this investigation, what else do they not know about?
It certainly raises a lot of questions, and we have been trying to get answers to those questions tonight. Is there anything else you would like to add about this, Congressman? And is the IG investigation sufficient for you, or would you like to see more done?
I think the IG investigation is a good start, but there really needs to be a thorough accounting for what's happening at the Department of Justice. Unfortunately, what we saw is that Donald Trump and Bill Barr and Jeff Sessions not only politicized DOJ, they weaponized it. They weaponized it against their political opponents, and that's very dangerous. And
we do know the facts that Donald Trump publicly and privately had pushed DOJ to investigate his political rivals. And we know that that has happened regardless of why DOJ was able to get this information, regardless of why they opened up these investigations. We do have that information. So certainly there were some unprecedented moves from DOJ under Donald Trump, and many more questions lingering tonight. Congressman, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much, Kamala.
And coming up, joining me now to discuss is former U.S. Attorney and CNN legal analyst Preet Bharara. Preet, you heard our discussion. What is your reaction to what we know so far?
Well, so on certain grounds, I'm on the same page as the congressman. I think there are a lot of questions that need answering. The Inspector General report, I also agree, is a good first start, and it happened very quickly. That tells you something about the seriousness of with which people are taking the questions that have arisen. Sometimes Inspector General investigations don't commence for some time until there's a gathering of more evidence. This happened quite quickly, but that's going to take months and months and months, potentially. Those are very rigorous, time-consuming, laborious investigations. What I think is interesting, and you alluded to it in your interview with the congressman, is that not only the Deputy Attorney General, the prior Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, but it has also been reported this week that the former Attorney General, Bill Barr, claimed they did not know that these subpoenas reached the electronic devices and communications, metadata at least, of two sitting U.S. congressmen on the Intelligence Committee. That has to be explained. It seems to be at odds with some of the very specific reporting we got from the New York Times. And if you take them at their word that they didn't know, the question is, was it an innocent thing that they didn't know? Was someone going rogue? Was there overreach by someone else in the department, or are they not telling the truth? Or are they forgetful to a degree that you wouldn't expect in high officials in that position? So lots and lots of questions. Too early to say if anyone should be blamed or held accountable criminally. I don't think that seems like a viable possibility or probability, but you don't know. And so the most important thing is for the department to figure out a way that's appropriate and consistent with grand jury secrecy rules to explain what happened.
The bottom line is Apple was the one to let Schiff and Swalwell know that their metadata had been handed over to DOJ. If that happens, if DOJ has the metadata of two sitting members of Congress, shouldn't the top officials, shouldn't the Attorney General know about that?
Yeah, that's why I'm saying there are a lot of questions here about how that could be. You sketched out a scenario a few minutes ago that some people have been talking about. I just don't know if it's plausible or not, that the metadata was sought or other data was sought with respect to communications by a lower level staffer based on some predication that the department had that maybe that person leaked sensitive information or confidential information. And then in a sweep of that junior staffer's phone or devices, brought into the ambit of that were Swalwell's and Schiff's. And then somebody, without briefing anyone else, did some further inquiries and further issuance of subpoenas. I don't know. I guess that's possible. But it seems when you're doing something as sensitive as this, particularly against the backdrop of the sitting president of the United States saying that he wants particular investigations against particular people, and those people are who? They're his political adversaries who are critics of his. The whole thing just doesn't look right, and you would expect people in a high position to know about it, and if they didn't, we need to know why they didn't know about it.
Right, because the heart of that is people's trust in these institutions and the institution of DOJ, that it's going to be independent from the White House. It's going to be all about the rule of law and not politics. But that raises the question, what you just said about leak investigations in general and whether they should be reined in at all. I mean, is there a proper way for the DOJ to investigate leaks of classified information from within Congress without gathering information from sitting members, sitting lawmakers?
Well, let me say something about leak investigations generally. They're very difficult. They're very sensitive, not just with respect to members of Congress when you're talking about intelligence committee data, but by definition, a leak is almost always in the context of someone who has information that is classified or otherwise confidential and secret, and shares it with a member of the press. And so where you mostly find, these debates and arguments and discussions, both inside and outside of Congress and inside and outside of the Department of Justice, is the degree to which it's appropriate for prosecutors to subpoena reporters' records. And the current president of the United States, Joe Biden, has said that he wants to take a step back from doing that kind of thing. But it also remains true, as a legal matter, that leaking certain sensitive, confidential, and classified information remains a violation of law. And so this is an age-old problem that you've had, in the balance between a free press, the independence of Congress, and also the violation of law. And I don't have an easy answer to that, but clearly from the way, clearly from the way that people have been acting, the aggressiveness of the way that these prosecutors seem to have gotten the metadata of two sitting congressmen who are critics of the president, all of this should be looked at, I think, anew.
All right, Preet Bharara, thanks for offering all of your perspective and experience on this important topic. We hope we can learn more very soon. We appreciate it.
Good to be with you, Pamela. Thank you.
Also ahead, two doctors debate the emergency use of COVID vaccines for children under 12. So we're going to have a big discussion about that. And then Jill Biden steals the show as the First Lady makes her mark on the world stage. And no one wields a sword quite like the Queen, especially when there's a cake involved. But first, our Clarissa Ward is in the UK putting the British Prime Minister on the spot.
He also famously referred to you as a physical and emotional clone of President Trump. I just wonder how you responded to that.
You'll hear Boris Johnson's answer when we come back. After 4 years of insults, tension, and Trumpism, world leaders traumatized from dealing with the former president have given a very warm welcome to Joe Biden at the G7 summit. He's been sending the message loud and clear: America is back. The big focus today, how to better compete with China in the aftermath of the pandemic. After the G7, President Biden heads to Brussels for the NATO summit. Then it's on to Geneva for his highly anticipated meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Russia is not part of the G7, but its presence is looming large. And there are new comments from the Russian president himself. Vladimir Putin told NBC that the U.S.-Russia relationship is at its lowest point in years. He also had praise for former President Trump, but for Biden, not so much.
Well, even now, I believe that former U.S. President, Mr. Trump, is an extraordinary individual, talented individual. Otherwise, he would not have become U.S. President. President Biden, of course, is radically different from Trump because President Biden is a career man. He has spent virtually his entire adulthood in politics. Just think of the number of years he spent in the Senate. A different kind of person. And it is my great hope that, yes, there are some advantages, some disadvantages, but there will not be any impulse-based movements on behalf of the sitting U.S. president.
Our Phil Mattingly is live in Falmouth, England, and so is our chief international correspondent, Clarissa Ward. She has been speaking with the British Prime Minister. Great to see you both, Phil. Let's start with you. The White House has tried to temper expectations of any big breakthrough during the Putin talks. Is Russia also saying, don't expect much?
I think the short answer is yes, but not necessarily because of any particular message, more that just the relationship is at a level right now where the toxicity is such that any major breakthrough seems completely out of the question. And I don't necessarily think when you talk to White House officials, that's why they wanted to have the president sit down with President Putin. Their goal is stability. Their goal is predictability. Their goal isn't some grand outcome that welcomes Russia back into the international fold. And I think while they've made clear President Biden will be firm with the U.S. objections to Russian action elections, whether it relates to cyber attacks, whether it relates to political opposition leaders, whether it relates to Russian aggression related to Ukraine, they also plan, or the president also plans, to look for areas of agreement, look for areas where the two countries can work together. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that U.S. officials are keyed in on right now. They want to let President Putin know where President Biden believes there are red lines. They want the President Putin to be aware how the U.S. will respond if those lines are crossed. But more than that, they want President Putin to understand that the new president, President Biden, and his administration want to figure out if there are ways to communicate better, to bring the relationship at least to a better spot than it's in right now, and perhaps work together on issues like Iran or Afghanistan, and find a pathway, not necessarily to a great relationship, but to one that's at least workable over the course of the next months and years. Whether that can actually happen, of course, is an open question. And I would note, U.S. officials have made very clear they are not going to have a joint press conference. That is by design. They don't want it viewed as President Putin being on the same level as President Biden. They do want that sit down, however, Pamela.
All right, Phil Medley, I know we'll be covering that closely, watching it all play out. Thanks so much. Meantime, the British Prime Minister is also speaking out about President Putin, saying he has done, quote, unconscionable things. Boris Johnson spoke with our Clarissa Ward, and Clarissa joins me now from Cornwall. So what did he say, Clarissa?
Well, we talked about several issues. We started out by discussing the change in the dynamic here at the G7 with President Biden leading the U.S. delegation as opposed to President Trump leading the U.S. delegation. Perhaps understandably, Prime Minister Boris Johnson didn't want to be drawn too much on the subject of talking about President Trump. He was much keener to talk about President Biden, praising the president, saying how many shared interests they have. We did, of course, ask him about comments that President Biden made a couple of years ago, calling Boris Johnson a clone of Donald Trump. It's no secret that President Biden did not support the Brexit movement. Take a listen to some of the things we discussed. He also famously referred to you as a physical and emotional clone of President Trump. I just wonder how you responded to that and whether the relationship is in a better place now.
The relationship is in extremely good order, and I think that the Prime Minister of the UK has a job to do to get on with whoever is the President of the United States. That's what we do. But in this particular case, I want you to know that the relationship is extremely good.
And was it fair to call you a clone?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm not going to. People say all sorts of things about me. I think if I spent my time, disputing this or that, we wouldn't get a lot done. We're getting a huge lot done here at the G7. It's going well. It's beautiful weather. It's fantastic to see President Biden.
So can we just talk about next week quickly?
Yes.
President Putin.
Yes.
President Biden will be meeting with President Putin.
Yes.
President Biden famously said that he thought President Putin is a killer. Do you believe President Putin is a killer?
I certainly think that President Putin has done things that are unconscionable. I think that what Joe Biden will be doing when he goes to see Putin will be giving some pretty tough messages, and that's something I'd wholly approve of.
And Prime Minister Boris Johnson also said that he had delivered a similar message to President Putin the last time he had spoken with him, and that he was not interested in the normalization of relations between the UK and Russia until there is a shift in Russia's behavior. But as you just were discussing with Phil, Pamela, that is a very tall order. Expectations definitely being kept measured for this upcoming summit.
All right, Clarissa Ward, thanks so much. Well, tonight there is a passionate debate about whether the FDA should approve vaccinating children under 12 against coronavirus. When we come back, we're going to talk about the risks with two doctors on opposite sides of this debate. Stay with us. Well, should we or shouldn't we push to green light COVID vaccines for young children? That is a debate playing out in Washington and across the country. As of now, only people 12 and older can get the vaccine in the U.S., and vaccine advisors to the FDA are torn. Some say it's too soon to rush the use of these shots. COVID-19 can and does kill children, but generally they're at low risk. A big question now in this debate is, What if there's a resurgence of the virus in the fall and winter? What should parents do when it comes to their young children? Joining me now to talk about the pros and the cons, Dr. Cody Meissner. He is a professor of pediatrics at Tufts Children's Hospital and a member of the committee that advises the FDA on vaccine decisions. Also with me, CNN medical analyst Dr. Lena Wen. She's a former Baltimore Health Commissioner. So thank you both so much for coming on. I want to start with this. On Thursday, Dr. Meissner, you spoke out strongly against rushing the process of emergency use authorization for children under 12. What are your key concerns?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Pamela, for the opportunity to talk with you and Dr. Wen this afternoon. Let me make a few introductory points. First of all, the availability of the vaccines that are present throughout the United States and other parts of the world are truly remarkable. And we are so fortunate to have access to these vaccines. As you know, the rates of COVID-19 cases, the rates of hospitalization, the rates of deaths are plummeting. And that's in very large part due to the remarkable safety and efficacy of these vaccines. So there is no question, there's no discussion that adults should avail themselves of these vaccines. That is not in discussion, and I don't think anyone disputes it. The issue comes when we look at disease rates in children who are under 18 and even among adolescents who are under 24 years of age. If we look at the most recent data from the CDC, and anyone can access it on COVIDnet, it shows that the rates of hospitalization as of the week starting June 2nd are 4 hospitalizations per million people under 18 years of age. So the hospitalization rate or the illness rate is minuscule among young children. I think no one will dispute the fact that we need a vaccine for adolescents and children. However, we want to be very certain that the benefits of the vaccine outweigh the side effects of the vaccine. And we are seeing...
Let me let Dr. Wen get in so we can make sure we're having a fulsome discussion here. Dr. Wen, you disagree with Dr. Meissner's point of view on this. How so?
Well, I agree on many parts.
You do agree on the first part. I want to make that clear. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely, on the benefit of the vaccine. And also, I agree that we need to have a safe vaccine. I'm the mom of 2 young kids, a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old, or almost 4-year-old. And I definitely want to make sure that whatever we give our kids is proven to be safe and effective. Here's the thing, though. I disagree with Dr. Meissner about the risk to young children. When we look at the numbers, we see that since the beginning of the pandemic, 4 million children approximately have been diagnosed with COVID-19. More than 300 children have died. COVID has come from nowhere to become one of the top 10 leading causes of death among children. Thousands of children have been diagnosed with this multi-system inflammatory syndrome that may cause long-term effects. Tens of thousands of children have been hospitalized since the beginning of the pandemic due to COVID. And so when I look at this in totality, yes, some people may say the risk to children is lower than the risk to adults. That is true. But when I think about my children, if I have the opportunity to reduce a low risk of something terrible to essentially zero with a vaccine, I would want to do that. And I guess my point here is I just want to make sure that we are really prioritizing research in vaccines for children. I want to make sure that there is emergency use authorization available on the path for these vaccines so that parents like me who are really concerned about the risk of COVID to our children are able to avail ourselves of the opportunity to get this vaccine for our kids.
And when we talk about the research, what we know, Dr. Meissner, you had mentioned side effects, but let's be really clear. What can you tell us about what we actually know about any side effects that could happen attached to the vaccine when it comes to children?
Well, first, I'd like to respond to Dr. Wen's comment. She is describing hospitalization rates and deaths that have occurred over the last 18 months during the pandemic. And it has been a devastating time. There's absolutely no question about that. But this pandemic is going away. If you look at the rates of disease, the rates of hospitalization, because that's really what's important, not the number of cases. The CDC defines a case as a person who has a positive test, the so-called PCR test, which is not really a case. If you and I discussed a case of measles, it would be a patient who is sick. But they include anyone who's got a positive test. And that is not a good definition of a case. But even if you accept that, the number of cases are way down. They're lower than they have been for more than a year. So I don't think we should make decisions based on what has happened in the past. We have to make our decisions based on what's been going on in the last month or two. The fact is that most people have acquired some degree of immunity. Perhaps 20% have immunity from an illness, and about 50% of the adults, people over 18 in the United States, have received 2 doses. So we are getting very close to Dr. Fauci's estimate of 70 to 80% herd immunity that's necessary to begin to control this pandemic. We've got over 70% now between those who've been immunized and those who've had the disease. So we can't make a decision about vaccinating adolescents and children based on what's happened in the past 16 or 18 months. And there is a very clear...
Just make sure we get Dr. Nguyen and Dr. Meissner. As I look at the time, go ahead and finish what you were going to say, and then Dr. Nguyen, I'll go to you. Dr. Meissner,
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I'm sorry if I'm saying too much here. But if we look at the data regarding the safety of these vaccines, there have been 475 cases of myocarditis that have been reported to the CDC. Now, myocarditis is not a trivial disease. And I just want to be very certain that the benefit of the vaccine exceeds the risks from the vaccine. If we say that there are 4 hospitalizations per million people under 18, I want to be very sure that the risk of an adverse event is lower than 4 per million. Otherwise, the vaccine is causing more disease than we're seeing from an actual infection. And we don't know that yet.
And I think you both can agree, look, you want this to be low risk for kids. And there has been a lot of talk about whether any side effects are actually attached to the vaccine or if they're just naturally occurring illnesses that happen routinely, and it just so happens coincidentally that it came about after the vaccine. What do we know about that, Doctor? Go ahead.
We're past that stage. There's no question that there is an association with the vaccine.
I want to get to Dr. Nguyen. Okay, that's good. And I think she'll give her opinion on this. Go ahead, Dr. Nguyen.
Well, let me first just say that there has not been a case of polio in the United States in children since the 1970s. And yet we vaccinate our children against polio. I mean, I don't think it's really appropriate to look at the numbers of infections as the only measure of what we're trying to do, because the whole point of vaccination is to prevent people from getting a particular illness. And by the way, I do not think that the pandemic in the U.S. is over. I don't agree with the assessment that Dr. Meissner gave respectfully about us having reached herd immunity here. I don't think we are there. I'm really concerned about what's going to happen in the months to come when we have more contagious variants, when there are hotspots raging around the world, and when we have some substantial portions of the United States that have low vaccination rates. And I, again, really worry about the risk to unvaccinated people. Right now, vaccinated people are well protected, but unvaccinated individuals, including children, are, I think, at higher risk because there are people around us who are unmasked, unvaccinated, potentially spreading COVID to others. Also, it is important that we calculate the number of people who are asymptomatic carriers, because those individuals are also reservoirs for infection. CDC estimates that 50% of infections are from asymptomatic people. And I'm sure that none of us want our children to be reservoirs for disease that will then infect other people in our extended family and community. And so, again, I would agree with Dr. Meisner, though, that we should look at the side effects. We absolutely want to be totally transparent and careful in our investigation. The CDC is meeting later this week or next week, rather, in 5 days, in order to, or on Friday, in order to look at the instances of myocarditis. And I think we should absolutely look at those side effects, but we also have to consider the cost of not doing something, the cost of having a vaccine that could actually prevent severe illness and even death in our children and not deploying it.
Okay, thank you so much. I think it's really important that we heard both of your perspectives. As parents, I'm a parent. Dr. Nguyen, I know you are. Dr. Meisner, I don't know about you. But, look, we all care about our kids. We want what's best for them. And I just think the more information that we can use to weigh the pros and cons, the better. So thank you both for coming on the show and offering your perspectives.
Thank you very much, Pamela, and thank you, Dr. Nguyen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Meisner. Thank you.
A significant portion of the western U.S. is facing drought conditions.